Welcome to EJB Talks, Rutgers Blaustein School experts in policy, planning, and health, where we talk with our faculty and staff experts, as well as students, about how the fields of public policy, urban planning, public health, health administration, and public and urban informatics affect your lives. Welcome to EJB Talks. I'm Stuart Shapiro, the Associate Dean of Faculty at the Blaustein School, and the purpose of this podcast is to highlight the work my colleagues in the fields of policy, planning, and health are doing to make the world, country, and New Jersey a better place. Today, we're going to go back to talking politics, one of the things that originated this podcast. And my colleague Amy Cobb is going to step away from her production role to be an interviewer. And she's going to talk to me about what's going on in Washington, particularly as regards the Republican Party.
All right, so just jumping right in, I've noticed you've written about what happens to the Republican Party as it currently is really actually the most important with regards to what's happening for our country. But why is that?
So, as everyone knows, we live in a two-party democracy. Maybe one day there'll be more viable parties, but right now we've got two of them. And that means that they're going to trade power at different times, as we've seen repeatedly over the lifetimes of pretty much anyone listening to this podcast. That means the Republicans are going to come back in power at some point. And right now, the Republican Party has morphed into a party that is not just against the Democrats, but against democracy itself. And if you have a party that is opposed to democracy take power, we are seeing throughout the country the kind of things they will do. They will do whatever they need to hold on to power, including stripping voting rights, changing representation, changing the rules of democracy itself. If you want blueprints for how that works, check out Erdogan in Turkey, check out Orban in Hungary. There's a playbook out there. And so, in terms of the long term fate of our democracy, the what happens to the Republican Party is critically important. The civil war that is to some degree going on there, although it's more of a rout than a civil war, to be honest. The outcome of that is going to determine what the Republican Party looks like the next time it takes power, whether that's 2024, 2028, 2032, whenever. And for the future of the country, those of us that may not be Republicans or conservative by nature still need to care a great deal about what goes on in that party.
So, speaking of what's going on in the Republican Party currently, I think of one name right now who surprises me that I agreed with her so much these last few weeks. I'm talking about Liz Cheney in particular, which her being some kind of radical Republican right now blows my mind. But what does her departure from leadership really mean?
So, like you, this is probably the first time I've ever agreed with Liz Cheney and Representative Liz Cheney. And obviously, her stance has prompted much hand wringing among those of us on left of center. And do we be nice to her? Do we argue about everything she's done throughout her career, which we oppose? And there's plenty there to oppose, particularly if one thinks back to the actions of her father as vice president as well. I'm in the camp, though, that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And
Right.
right now, Liz Cheney is the most prominent voice within the Republican Party, calling out the anti democratic tendencies spurred on by Trump and echoed by many members of Congress. For that, she was punished last week. She was stripped of her leadership role in the House of Representatives. She was the third leading figure in the Republican Party, and that was taken away from her and instead given to Representative Elise Stefanik of New York, who is much more willing to toe the Trump line. What does that mean going forward? First of all, it's a signal to anyone that if you dissent from the anti democratic bent of the party, you will be purged. I mean, it has a very sort of purging feel to it. And we use purged in terms of thinking about Stalin and other times historically. I mean, the Republican Party is purging dissenting voices. Um, the second thing, though, is it does position Cheney as the leader of the anti Trump right because there's no questioning her conservative credentials. This is not a moderate like Adam Kinzinger from Illinois or those that have left government like Charlie Dent or are retiring like Rob Portman. Liz Cheney is a true blue conservative. And so her stance is saying, look, if there is a future for this party outside of Donald Trump and stripping away voting rights and things like that, then I am it. Now, I am very dubious that there is a future for this party outside of those things I mentioned. And so I think there's something of a long shot aspect to Cheney's maneuver there. But on the other hand, the pro Trump force is very crowded. Who will be the leader of that party after Trump, if there is an after Trump, is a very crowded field. Cheney now has the field within the party of being opposed to these things pretty much to herself. And so that is also the significance of what happened last week.
Just to build upon the Stefanik piece, I think they were comparing her voting record to Cheney, and surprisingly, she has a much more moderate voting record. So you have to assume she's well aware of the political nature of what's going on right now and doesn't want to lose her seat. But that kind of scares you as a person in the public that they'd be willing to go so far, even though she votes in a much more moderate way.
Right. Well, we should clarify terms here. I mean, on policy, Trump is and was in some ways more moderate than some of his Republican opponents in the 2016 primary. Ted Cruz, he was certainly more moderate than Cruz, and probably more so than Rubio. And Stefanik, in that sense, is very much a Trump Republican. But what the Trump wing represents more than conservatism or moderation is sort of a post policy mindset where they don't really care about policy. They care about power. And they care. I mean, we can argue there are a few policy issues like immigration and racial issues that they do seem to have very dangerous takes on. But for the most part, what the right tax level should be, or how we deal with climate change, or anything else. It's about owning the libs. It's not about policy outcomes in any sense. And so, in that sense, Stefanik is an outstanding avatar of Trump, and she comes from an area of New York State that it makes sense that she would be so, but rather a view that they want their caste to hold on to power, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to do so. And if that involves conservative policy outcomes, great. If that involves moderate policy outcomes, great. The policy is irrelevant here. And that's the key feature. I mean, Kevin McCarthy, for all I hated Paul Ryan, Paul Ryan had thoughts. Paul Ryan had ideas about the way that government should function. He was an Ayn Rand disciple. Kevin McCarthy does not seem to have any policy preferences whatsoever. And as such, he too is quite a fitting leader of a Trumpist party.
Okay, well, that's I'm going to lead into something else that may press me a little bit more. Um,
You're asking here,
I am asking for it. It's been why not? So we're talking about. I'm going to go back all the way to January 6th, with which to me seems, might as well have been 2 years ago. And increasingly, it feels like it's too far away for any accountability for January 6th to really take place, and even seems more far away now since the Cheney's done. So what, if any, accountability? I know they're working on, or they have the commission now in the House, like they're trying to set it up like they had the 9/11 commission. But is that even going to take anything seriously, or is that going to go anywhere?
Yeah, I mean, I do think that Attorney General Merrick Garland is taking this very seriously, and the number of arrests has been impressive, and the number of court cases they are filing are impressive. But these are not easy cases to prosecute. I mean, there are, if people were just protesting, even if they were protesting something ridiculous like the results of the election, they have the right to do that. Freedom of speech is the First Amendment, for goodness sakes. And so you have to find incidents of actual violence or incitement to violence in order to do successful prosecutions. And I think I'm confident Garland's very smart. The people he has there are very smart. They're going to get convictions to some degree. So there'll be some accountability. Now, whether there's accountability for the Donald Trumps, the Josh Hawleys of the world, that I'm much more dubious about, and I think the 9/11 Commission is an endeavor to do that. There are some Republicans on board, representatives like Kitzinger and Katko and Cheney, senators like Romney, and I would bet eventually Murkowski will back it. But it's going to be a very dicey dance to get something passed through Congress and establish it. I'm hopeful, but I am not by no means confident. At the same time, one thing that's very dismaying is the number of representatives last week that were just out and out lying about January 6th. The fact that they were saying things like it was tourists, there was no violence there. The only people hurt were Trump supporters. It was Antifa that was really the problem. All of those things are so far outside the factual record, and to have not just a Marjorie Taylor Greene, there's always going to be at least one congressperson that's really out there, but to have about a half a dozen to a dozen of them spouting that stuff, it's like they got rid of Steve King, but when you cut off his head, you created 12 acolytes there, and so it's very just difficult to stomach the presence of that degree of individuals outside the factual record there in Congress.
Yeah, you kind of wish they would just be to the point where, oh, we just need to move on, which a lot of them had said for a while. Now it's just
Right, as
it's science
appalling as
fiction.
as appalling as that position is, it's not nearly as bad as the one we heard
Yeah,
voiced in hearings last week.
great. Well, let's move on to something that's going to make me feel so much better. The midterms. I don't even know if I want to ask you about the midterms too, but I'm going to anyway. What's the sense of the midterms coming up? Should we be worried about seats and number of seats, or do you think it's going to be relatively status quo for right now?
So it's all still a long way away, as you noted. I mean, it is still 18 months, 17
That
months.
never seems that far anymore with elections. It seems
No,
they
I
start right
know, I
away.
know. And we will have a much better picture of things, 6 months to a year from now. Right now, if you feel compelled to make predictions or feel compelled to bet, I would say that the Republicans are definitely favorites to take the House back. Um, the Senate is much harder to predict. I mean, maybe the Democrats are slight favorites to hold on to the Senate, but it's probably too early to say. Incumbent parties always do bad at midterm elections. There are one or two exceptions: 1998, 2002. Um, but between redistricting and retirements, it's hard to imagine that this will be an exception. Now, it might not be terrible. It might not be a 2010 or 2018 route where the party in power loses 40 seats. I think there's every reason to believe that's not what we'll see. But certainly you would expect Republicans to have the advantage. The one thing that helps the Democrats is that the map in the Senate is pretty favorable for them in terms of whose seats are going to be up for election. And that's why I say their chances of keeping the Senate are definitely better than keeping the House.
Finally, I'd like to talk about the Democrats themselves. What can they do? What maybe not about the elections, but what can they do in the next 18 months, and even in the next few months, to make a positive shift, positive change, keep momentum going.
So, in terms of what's going on in the Republican Party, they are fairly helpless. They did what Nancy Pelosi praised Liz Cheney, which I doubt she was as surprised to find herself doing as you and I were. So I do think they're saying the right things as far as what's going on within the Republican Party. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I don't think you'll loosen the Trumpists' grip until they have a major electoral defeat. And they did not have one in 2020. Well, nobody thinks the election was stolen, that is really sort of following the news. The election was close, and Republicans picked up seats in the House. And so it was not the message that would lead the Republican Party to abandon Trump, and the ideas such as they are that he represents. So what the Democrats would need to do is they need to win big, and the path toward winning big is being successful over the next year and a half or even 3.5 years to build an economy that is producing jobs, to build an economy that is spreading prosperity more broadly. Those are the things they have to do. And they have to do so, obviously, in the face of Republican opposition in Congress, which has been proven to be pretty adamant. That said, I think there are a lot of reasons to think the economy is looking up quite a bit. If the American Job Plan or the American Families Plan, if they pass to some degree, even if you don't get 90%, but you get 60% of what's in them, that will help ensure that the gains from this growing economy are spread more equally. When people are economically secure and happy, they are more likely to support the party in power that produced that. And so that Biden is completely right in focusing on those things as his priority, because there's not much he can do about the Republican Party right now.
Well, as always, Stu, it's always such an uplifting conversation. Although I think maybe Democrats have learned a lesson to just forge ahead right now, just get the things done they need to get done. I'm hoping.
Yeah,
Look, I'm being hopeful. That's not typical for me. Usually
good,
I'm the negative person.
good. Glad to
Maybe I'm
hear
just
that.
tired.
I think so. I think you probably need some sleep.
I probably do.
Well, thank you, Amy, for stepping up and doing the interviewing. We'll be back next week with another talk from another expert at the Blaustein School. Until then, stay safe.